The sun was strong over Fort Bridger. It made the air wavy above the paved roads of the military base. At the main checkpoint, 2 guards stood in the sharp afternoon light. They were Private Miller, who was young and still learning, and Sergeant Hayes, who followed every rule exactly. The checkpoint was a small building with a metal gate. It was the first line of defense for the entire base. Every car and person had to stop here. It was usually a boring job, just checking papers and waving people through. But today was different. A woman walked towards them. She was not in a car. She wore simple work clothes that looked old and faded. A dusty green backpack was on her shoulders. She looked like any other person who did repair work on the base, but something felt different about her. She walked with a purpose, her eyes looking straight ahead. She handed her visitor pass to Sergeant Hayes. He looked at it, then looked at her, then back at the pass. His face grew tight with suspicion. He showed the pass to Private Miller. "This pass is not good," Sergeant Hayes said. His voice was firm and official. "It expired 2 weeks ago. Ma'am, we need to check everything you have. Please open your bag. Open the whole thing." The woman's name was Maya Coleman. She was 42 years old, though she looked like she had lived much longer. Her face was calm, without any expression. She did not argue with the guards. She did not complain or show any anger. She simply took the backpack from her shoulders, placed it on the metal inspection table, and unzipped it. There was no noise except for the sound of the zipper and the distant hum of the base. Out of the bag came tools. They were not normal tools. They were small and advanced. There was a soldering iron made for tiny electronics. There was a device for calibrating optics, the kind used on powerful military cameras and scopes. There was also a military map, folded neatly, and a thick notebook. The notebook was heavy and filled with handwritten notes and complex drawings. Private Miller, the younger guard, looked at the equipment with wide eyes. He had never seen a civilian with things like this. Sergeant Hayes picked up the optic calibrator. It felt heavy and serious in his hand. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was louder now. "You are a civilian contractor. You are not allowed to have this kind of equipment. This is military grade." Maya Coleman did not answer. She just stood there, her hands relaxed at her sides. She watched them, her gaze steady. Her silence seemed to make Sergeant Hayes more nervous and more aggressive. He thought she was hiding something. He thought her silence was a sign of guilt. He and Miller began to search the bag more roughly. They were no longer just inspecting, they were tearing through it. They pulled at the inner pockets and ripped at the cloth lining inside the backpack. They were sure they would find something illegal, something that would prove their suspicions were right. From a hidden pocket, a small object fell onto the table. It was a piece of folded cloth. It was not a tool or a weapon. It was a patch, the kind soldiers sew onto their uniforms. The patch had a design sewn in gray thread. It showed the head of a wolf. The wolf shape was fading into a thick fog, as if it was a ghost. It was the symbol of a unit that officially did not exist anymore. It was the insignia of Task Force Specter. Sergeant Hayes and Private Miller stared at the patch. They did not recognize it. To them, it was just another strange thing in the woman's bag. They were young soldiers. The stories of Task Force Specter were from a war that happened before their time. The unit was a legend, a myth whispered about by older soldiers. Its records were sealed and classified. "What is this?" Sergeant Hayes demanded, pointing at the patch. Maya Coleman said nothing. She looked past the guards, at the road behind them. She had the look of someone who had been through much worse than this. She had been questioned by people who were far more dangerous than these 2 young guards. Her patience was like a deep, still lake. What the guards saw was a suspicious woman with an old pass and military gear she should not have. They saw a problem they needed to solve. What they did not see was a piece of living history. They did not realize they were looking at someone whose name had been deleted from every official record, for reasons so secret they could not even imagine them. Task Force Specter had been a special unit, the best of the best. They were sent on missions no one else could do. But a mission in the Helmand Province, many years ago, had gone terribly wrong. There was an ambush. Officially, the report said all members of Task Force Specter were killed in action. The unit was formally disbanded. But that was not the whole truth. A few of them had survived. Maya was one of them. They chose to disappear, to become ghosts in the real world. It was safer than facing the political problems from a secret mission that, officially, had never even happened. Maya Coleman had been living in the quiet spaces ever since, not truly alive in the government's files, but not gone either. Just then, a senior officer happened to be walking by the checkpoint. He was Colonel Marcus Thorne, the commander of Fort Bridger. He was a tall man with a serious face and graying hair. He was on his way to a meeting when he saw the scene at the inspection table. He saw his 2 guards cornering a civilian woman. It was a normal sight. But then he saw the patch lying on the metal table. The small cloth patch with the gray wolf fading into fog. Colonel Thorne froze. His blood felt like it turned to ice. He walked forward slowly, his eyes locked on the patch. He had not seen that symbol in over a decade. He remembered it from a dusty, violent day in the Helmand Province. He remembered what it meant. He reached the table and leaned in close to Sergeant Hayes. He whispered, so that only the guards could hear. His voice was low but full of absolute authority. "Stand down," he ordered. "Don't touch anything else. Step away from the table." The guards were shocked. They looked at their colonel, confused. Why was he so serious? It was just an old patch. But they were soldiers, and they knew to obey a direct order from a colonel without question. They immediately stepped back from Maya and the table, their faces showing their complete confusion. Colonel Thorne did not look at them. He looked at Maya Coleman. His expression was a mix of shock, disbelief, and something else, respect. "That's Task Force Specter," he said, more to himself than to his men. He knew what that name meant. He knew the stories were not just stories. He had been there. Colonel Thorne immediately knew he could not handle this situation out in the open. He gestured for Maya to follow him. He led her away from the inspection table and into the small, private office inside the checkpoint building. He closed the door, leaving Sergeant Hayes and Private Miller standing outside in the sun, more confused than ever. They watched the closed door and started talking in hushed whispers. "Task Force Specter?" Miller asked. "I tried to look that up once. There's nothing. It's not listed in any of the current military databases. It's like it never existed." "I don't know," Hayes replied, shaking his head. "But you saw the colonel's face. He knew that patch. He looked like he'd seen a ghost." They both stood there, silent, wondering who that quiet woman really was, and why a high-ranking colonel would care so much about a faded piece of cloth. Inside the small office, the air was still intense. Colonel Thorne offered Maya a chair, but she remained standing. He sat down behind the simple desk, never taking his eyes off her. For a moment, he just looked at her, studying the lines on her face, trying to connect the woman in faded civilian clothes to the memory he had of a skilled operator from years ago. "We thought you were all gone," Thorne said finally. His voice was quiet, filled with a gravity that matched the moment. "The official report on the Helmand Province ambush in 2012, it said your entire team was killed in action. No survivors." Maya's expression did not change. Her voice, when she spoke, was as calm and steady as her gaze. "That's what the official records say," she agreed. "It was cleaner that way. But some of us walked out of that fire. After the mission, we were not supposed to exist. So we didn't." She moved towards the desk and placed her heavy logbook on it, pushing it gently towards him. The book was filled with pages of dense, handwritten notes. They were encrypted, a mix of code and technical shorthand that would look like nonsense to most people. But Thorne could recognize the format. It was a style used by high-level intelligence specialists. Maya opened the book to a recent page. It was covered in complex diagrams, radio frequencies, and notes on drone interference patterns. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes scanning the page. He was the base commander. He knew the secret problems Fort Bridger was facing. For the last 3 months, their advanced training drones had been acting strangely. They would lose their signal, fly off course, and sometimes almost crash. They had teams of engineers working on it, but everyone thought it was an equipment failure, a bug in the system. As he looked at Maya's notes, a specific drawing of a signal wave made him pause. His breath caught in his throat. "This interference signature," Thorne said, pointing to the drawing. "It matches the strange signals we've been tracking for months. It's a perfect match." "How do you know about this?" "Our drone operations are classified. This problem is not public knowledge." "I know about it because it's not an equipment failure," Maya replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "It's deliberate. Someone is sending a backdoor signal to your training drones. They are actively interfering with your systems." I recognized the technique. Colonel Thorne leaned back in his chair, the pieces clicking into place. This mysterious woman didn't just stumble upon this problem, she came here because of it. But her approach was all wrong. It was unofficial, almost designed to raise suspicion. "Why didn't you come to us through official channels? Why this way, with an expired pass and a bag full of red flags? Why not just report what you knew?" For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Maya's face. It was not anger or sadness, but a deep, settled weariness. "Because the last time I tried to help officially, my team was ambushed and my name was erased from every database in the country. Task Force Specter doesn't exist anymore, Colonel. According to your own government, I don't exist. But the threat to your base is very real. I came because I had to, not because I expected a warm welcome." Thorne looked from her steady eyes to the logbook on his desk. He had a choice to make. He could follow protocol, detain this woman, and hand her over to security. Or he could trust the ghost standing in front of him. He remembered that day in the Helmand Province. He had been a younger officer then, pinned down with his men, sure they were going to die. And then Task Force Specter had appeared, like phantoms from the dust, and turned the tide. He owed them his life. He owed her his trust. He picked up the phone on his desk, his eyes still on Maya. He signaled to a tech officer through the window, calling him into the office. The young officer entered, looking curiously at Maya. "I need you to verify something for me," Thorne said to the tech. He pointed to Maya's logbook. "This handwriting. I need you to run it against any old records we have in the deep archives. Look for classified documentation on Task Force Specter. Specifically, look for anything connected to the call sign Echo 4. The tech officer nodded, took a high-resolution photo of the handwriting with a secure device, and left the room. The silence returned. Maya sat down in the chair, finally. She looked completely calm, as if she had expected this. She had been through verification processes before, in much less friendly rooms. She knew how to wait. 20 minutes passed. It felt like an hour. Finally, the tech officer came back. He was holding a thin, digital folder, its screen marked with a red border that read Classified Historical. He looked nervous, holding a piece of a forgotten, almost mythical past. "Sir," the officer said, his voice hushed. "We found it. The handwriting is a perfect match. There's no doubt. This is Echo 4. She was the signals intelligence specialist for Task Force Specter. Sir, she designed the original counter-jamming protocols that our military drones still use today. The very foundation of our drone security, she built it." Colonel Thorne looked at Maya, not with suspicion anymore, but with a deep, dawning understanding. The woman who his guards had treated like a criminal was not just some forgotten soldier. She was a master architect of the very systems he was in charge of protecting. "You built the systems that are supposed to be protecting this base," Thorne said, stating the incredible fact out loud. "I built the foundation," Maya corrected him gently. "But every foundation has weaknesses. There were things I couldn't solve back then, 12 years ago. I didn't have enough time. Now, someone has found those old weaknesses. They have figured out how to exploit them. The full scope of the problem hit Colonel Thorne like a physical blow. This wasn't a random enemy or a simple malfunction. This was something far more personal and dangerous. Are you telling me, he said slowly, that our current security problems are coming from unfinished work in your original Task Force Specter designs? I'm telling you, Maya said, her eyes sharp and focused, that whoever is targeting your drones knows exactly how Task Force Specter systems think. They aren't just attacking you. They're using our own methods, our own secret techniques, against you. The implications were staggering. If someone had access to the secret methods of Task Force Specter, it meant one of two things. Either a massive amount of highly classified information had been stolen, or the other, more terrifying possibility was true: another survivor of the Helmand ambush, another member of her unit, had gone rogue. Who else from your unit survived that day? Thorne asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maya was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her hands. I always hoped I was the only one, she said softly. It seemed safer that way. For everyone. But the signature patterns in your drone interference, the way they move, the way they attack, they look familiar. It feels like I'm watching a ghost of my old team. Colonel Thorne was a man of action. He had seen enough. The rules of protocol no longer mattered. The threat was real, it was here, and the only person in the world who could stop it was sitting in front of him. He leaned forward, his decision made. The fate of his base, and maybe more, rested on this one choice. What do you need? He asked. What do you need from me to fix this? Maya looked up, her quiet patience replaced by the sharp focus of a specialist ready to work. 48 hours, she said. Give me 48 hours with full access to your drone control systems. And a small team of your best technicians. I need people who can follow instructions without asking 1,000 questions. Done, Colonel Thorne said without a moment's hesitation. The ghost was back, and he was putting her in charge. Over the next 2 days, the drone control center at Fort Bridger became a place of quiet, intense work. Colonel Thorne had handpicked a team of 3 trusted technical officers to work with Maya. He ordered them to give her whatever she needed and to follow her instructions as if they were his own. The main drone center was a large, dark room, filled with glowing screens showing maps, data streams, and video feeds from high-altitude aircraft. It was the nerve center of the base, and now it was Maya Coleman's workshop. She moved through the complex systems with a familiarity that was almost unnerving. It was like watching a master musician play an instrument they had built themselves. In many ways, she had. The core architecture, the secret code that ran everything, was her design from over a decade ago. She was not learning the system, she was remembering it. One of the younger technicians, a brilliant but by-the-book officer named Lieutenant Spencer, was initially very skeptical. He approached Colonel Thorne on the first day, his concern obvious. Sir, with all due respect, he said in a low voice, are we really handing over our entire multi-million-dollar drone program to a civilian consultant? Someone who walked in here with an expired pass. We don't really know who she is. Colonel Thorne just looked at him. Lieutenant, for now, all you need to know is that she knows more about this system than anyone else on this base, including you and me. Watch her. Learn from her. And do exactly as she says. Spencer followed his orders, but he watched Maya with a critical eye. He watched her ignore standard procedures, writing code directly into the core system instead of using the safer test environments. He saw her using encryption methods that were not in any current military manual. He was ready to report that she was a danger to the system. But after 6 hours of watching her work, his skepticism began to crumble. He saw not chaos, but a level of genius he had never witnessed before. She wasn't just patching holes, she was rebuilding the defenses from the ground up. She installed counter signals that could block unauthorized access attempts before they even reached the drones. She reprogrammed the emergency fallback frequencies, the last line of defense, with her old, forgotten encryption. Most importantly, after hours of tracking the faint, ghost-like signal that was causing the interference, she found its source. She triangulated the origin point, not to a place on a map, but to a specific satellite uplink that was being illegally used. Lieutenant Spencer, his face pale with awe, went back to Colonel Thorne. "Sir," he whispered, his earlier doubt completely gone. "You need to see this. She's not just fixing our system. Sir, she is our system. She built half of it. The core architecture, the command logic we've been using for years, it's all her design. I'm looking at code that's a decade old, signed with the call sign Echo 4. While Maya worked in the secure room, rumors began to spread across Fort Bridger. The story of the strange woman at the checkpoint had grown into a legend. Soldiers whispered about it in the mess halls and barracks. "Did you hear about that woman at the main gate?" one would say. "The one Colonel Thorne personally escorted inside?" "Yeah. I heard she's some kind of legend. They say she was Task Force Specter." "No way. I thought that unit was just a myth." "It's not a myth. And Thorne is vouching for her. That never happens." The name Maya Coleman was not known, but the legend of the quiet woman who had the Colonel's complete trust was growing by the hour. On the third day, her work was put to the ultimate test. It happened in the middle of a routine training mission. 3 of the base's most advanced drones were flying in formation high above the desert. Suddenly, the screens in the control room flashed red. Alarms blared through the room. "We've lost them," a controller shouted. "GPS signal is gone. They're flying blind." The 3 drone icons on the main map began to move in wild, erratic patterns. They were out of control, tumbling through the sky. A crash was seconds away. It would mean the loss of $50 million of equipment, and worse, the falling debris could injure people on the ground. Panic started to set in among the controllers. But then, something else happened. A new set of commands, written in a green, calm text, appeared on the main screen. It was Maya's new protocol. It automatically engaged the moment the external attack was detected. Her system isolated the drones from the false signal, cut them off from the GPS, and activated their internal stabilizers. The wild, tumbling icons on the screen suddenly stopped their chaotic dance. They steadied. They were holding their altitude, flying in a stable, level pattern. They were safe. The control room was silent for a moment, then it erupted in cheers and applause. Lieutenant Spencer looked over at Maya. She was standing quietly at the back of the room, watching the screens, her face showing no emotion. She had just saved them, but she looked as if she had just been watching the weather. It was all in a day's work for her. Without her intervention, it would have been a disaster. That evening, Colonel Thorne called an emergency security briefing. All the senior officers of Fort Bridger were gathered in the main conference room. The mood was tense. They all knew about the near disaster with the drones. Thorne stood at the front of the room, his face grim. 3 days ago, he began, we almost lost multiple aircraft to what we all believed was a simple equipment failure. I'm here to tell you it was not a failure. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. We were attacked, using advanced techniques specifically designed to exploit our biggest weaknesses. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he gestured to the back of the room. Maya Coleman was standing there, by the door, as usual trying to remain invisible. Thanks to the work of Ms. Maya Coleman, Thorne announced, his voice ringing with authority, this base is not only still fully operational, but it now has the most advanced drone security protocols in the entire military. He then looked directly at Maya and said, her call sign was Echo 4. She was an intelligence specialist with Task Force Specter. A major in the front row, a man who liked rules and regulations, spoke up. Sir, with all due respect, Task Force Specter was disbanded over a decade ago. All its members were listed as killed in action. How can we verify this woman's credentials? Colonel Thorne had been waiting for this question. He walked over to a small table and picked up a classified folder. He opened it. We can verify her credentials because I was there, he said, his voice raw with memory. I was there during the ambush in the Helmand Province. I was a young captain trapped with my men. We were out of ammo and out of time. Her unit saved 47 American soldiers that day. I was one of those soldiers. The room fell completely and utterly silent. The officers stared at Thorne, and then back at the quiet woman by the door. She was not just a consultant. She was a hero from a forgotten battle. Echo 4 didn't just design our current systems in a lab, Thorne continued, his voice thick with emotion. She risked her life on the battlefield to keep those systems running under enemy fire, while the rest of her unit provided cover for a full evacuation. They saved us all. He then turned to face Maya. In front of his entire command staff, Colonel Marcus Thorne, the commander of Fort Bridger, drew himself up to his full height and gave her a sharp, perfect salute. It was the highest sign of respect a soldier could give. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and strong. "It's an honor to finally thank you properly." The room was still silent, the officers watching this incredible moment. But Maya's response surprised everyone. She did not salute back. She simply gave a small, respectful nod. "Colonel," she said, her voice just loud enough to be heard across the room. "I didn't come back here for thanks. I came back because I recognized the attack pattern. The threat isn't over." She paused, then delivered the line that changed everything. "Someone else from my unit is responsible for these intrusions. Another member of Task Force Specter is still out there." The room erupted in shocked whispers. A rogue operative from an elite ghost unit? It was a scenario no one had ever considered. The enemy wasn't a foreign power. The enemy was one of their own, a ghost from their past. "Who?" Thorne asked urgently. "I have my suspicions," Maya said. "Based on the style of the attack, the way they think. But I'll need more time to be certain. What I can tell you is that this won't be the last attempt. Task Force Specter was trained to be persistent. They never give up." Colonel Thorne made a decision right there. He looked at Maya, not as a problem to be managed, but as his only solution. "Ma'am, I'm offering you a permanent consultant position here at Fort Bridger. Full security clearance restored. Name your price. Help us stay ahead of whoever is doing this." Maya considered the offer for a long moment. The room was quiet, waiting for her answer. "I will help you catch them," she said finally. "But I work alone. And I don't want my name in any official databases. Some ghosts are better left that way." Maya Coleman refused any official rank. She did not want to be reinstated, and she did not want a permanent assignment on the base. She had no interest in reclaiming a career she had left behind long ago. "I didn't come back for recognition," she told Colonel Thorne in private. "I came back because I didn't want to see another good unit erased, the way mine was." Instead, she settled into a quiet routine. Once a week, she would arrive at Fort Bridger. She always came in her simple civilian clothes, carrying her old backpack. She would spend the day in the drone control center, quietly inspecting the new systems, monitoring the global networks for any sign of an intrusion, and working with Lieutenant Spencer and his team to strengthen their defenses. The technical team stopped seeing her as a strange outsider. They began to refer to her simply as Ms. Coleman, but their tone was one of complete and total respect. They knew that she was the quiet guardian of their entire network. She was the architect who had come back to protect her creation. Outside the small checkpoint booth where she had first been searched, a small, simple steel plaque was quietly installed on the back wall. It was not large or fancy. Most people who walked by would not even notice it. The plaque read, "In honor of the one who didn't need orders to protect us. Task Force Specter lives on." Maya would sometimes pause there on her way out of the base, reading the words. She never stayed for more than a moment. She preferred to work without ceremony. One afternoon, as she was leaving, Private Miller, the young guard who had searched her bag so aggressively, approached her. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Ma'am," he began, his voice full of regret. I want to apologize for how we treated you at the checkpoint that day. I was wrong. Maya looked at him, and for the first time, she gave him the smallest of smiles. "You were doing your job, Private," she said softly. "You were following the rules. I respect that." "But we should have known," Miller insisted. "No," Maya replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You couldn't have known. That was the whole point." She gave him a final nod and walked away, disappearing down the long road leading away from the base. For 6 months, there were no more attacks. The drone systems at Fort Bridger remained silent and secure. Whether Maya had found the rogue operative and stopped them, or whether her powerful new security improvements had simply made further attacks impossible, nobody knew for certain. Colonel Thorne never asked, and Maya never said. But the security systems she had designed and rebuilt at Fort Bridger became the new standard. They served as a model for military installations all across the country. A year later, new technical officers arriving at Fort Bridger for training would be given a special piece of advice. Their instructors would tell them, "Listen, you are going to encounter problems here that seem impossible to solve. You will find code you don't understand in systems that don't appear in any manual. When that happens, there's a civilian consultant, a Ms. Coleman, who comes in on Wednesdays. If you see her, be respectful. Ask your questions quietly, and she might just help you understand systems you didn't even know existed." Today, military cybersecurity protocols across all branches of the armed forces use techniques that were developed by Maya Coleman. Her work protects millions of dollars of equipment and countless lives. Yet her name appears in no official roster. She is not listed on any payroll. She is a ghost, a silent protector who chose to remain invisible rather than reclaim a spotlight she had never wanted in the first place. Her story became a quiet lesson at Fort Bridger. It taught everyone that you should help people, regardless of whether you get official credit for it. It taught them to protect their institutions, even when those same institutions have forgotten you. And if they finally recognize your value, it taught them to stay humble enough to keep working quietly in the background. Because the most important security, the most vital protection, is often provided by the people who prefer to remain unseen. True honor is quiet. Sometimes, the real heroes don't arrive with loud ceremonies and parades. They don't walk through the front gate to the sound of trumpets. They come through side checkpoints with ripped bags, old notebooks, and names that have been erased from the official systems. Maya Coleman didn't come back to Fort Bridger for glory or recognition. She came back to prevent a disaster, because she had already seen too many good people lost to mistakes that could have been prevented. In a world that is obsessed with official records and paperwork, she reminds us that just because someone is not in the system, it doesn't mean they are not essential to the story. The most dangerous assumption anyone can make is that the person with expired credentials doesn't have current, vital knowledge. The most valuable expertise often belongs to the people who no longer seek official positions or powerful titles. And the most important protection often comes from the quiet guardians who prefer to work in the shadows. We must learn to look beyond the paperwork, to respect the people who have walked away from the chase for recognition, and to remember that the most critical knowledge is often carried by those who have chosen silence over the spotlight. We need to protect our legends, especially the ones who would rather be left alone. She never needed to speak of her honor, her actions spoke for her. She was a quiet protector, and that was more than enough.